I need you to stay with me for the next 30 seconds because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of thing most people think only happens in movies. 2 days after I had my twins, my mother-in-law walked into my hospital room with a check, a lawyer, and my husband's girlfriend. She dropped $25 million on my lap and told me to choose between the money and my daughters. I chose both. And by the time their lawyer got to his office the next morning, he realized the most expensive check Margaret Caldwell had ever written had bought her absolutely nothing. I'm Cassandra Torres. I'm 35. I analyze risk for a living, and this woman had no idea who she was sitting across from in that hospital room. This is my story. Welcome back to Silent Revenge, the channel where the quiet ones fight back and win. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found this. Make sure you subscribe before we go any further, because what I'm about to share today is one of the most intense, most emotional, and most satisfying stories I have ever told. Today's story is about family betrayal. It's about a powerful woman who thought her money made her untouchable. It's about what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. And it's about two little girls who never had to know any of it, because their mom handled it. If that speaks to you, drop a comment right now and tell me which state you're watching from. I want to know where my silent revenge family is tonight. Now let's get into it. Let me tell you about my job first, because it's the whole reason this story ends the way it does. I work in insurance risk analysis. Companies hire people like me to look at the math behind every promise a business makes, to figure out whether the money they're sitting on today will actually be enough to cover what they owe 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's not glamorous work. But it teaches you one thing nobody else learns: how to spot a lie disguised as a number. My dad sold life insurance out of a tiny shop in Dayton, Ohio. He had this handshake that made people trust him before he opened his mouth. He passed away when I was 27, the kind of loss that changes your whole wiring whether you're ready for it or not. The last really useful thing he said to me before he died was simple: "Cassie, numbers don't fake it. People do. Know the difference." I've been chasing that difference ever since. My whole career, people have seen my calm and read it as having nothing to say, as being a pushover, as being safe to ignore. Caldwell's made that same mistake, and they made it bigger and louder than anyone ever had before. I met Daniel Caldwell at an industry conference in Nashville when I was 29. He was charming in that easy, zero-effort way that should have been a warning sign but wasn't. He told me his family ran a mid-sized insurance company in Wisconsin that his late dad had built. He said a lot of things. He didn't mention that his mom had been running every human being in that family for the last 20 years. We got married 18 months after we met. Looking back, that was too fast. I kept my job. I kept my maiden name on my professional licenses just out of habit. That one lazy habit turned out to matter more than anything else I ever did. First time I stepped into Caldwell Manor, this big stone house on the edge of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, I knew exactly where I ranked inside of 10 minutes. Margaret greeted me with a smile that was more like a filing system. She was pressed linen, pearl necklace, and this heavy floral perfume that felt like it was designed to crowd out everything else in the room. Her late husband Richard's oil painting hung over the staircase like a man who never actually left. Margaret ran the house, the business, and the board, all in his name, all for her own reasons. Their estate manager, a too-smooth guy named Todd, who Margaret kept close like an attack dog in a nice suit, rounded out the welcome committee. For 3 years I told myself the coldness was just old money doing what old money does. I told myself I was the outsider who would slowly become inside. I had my career, my marriage, a future I thought I could see the shape of. For 3 years, almost every part of that story was wrong. Here's something they don't tell you about betrayal in any movie or TV show. It almost never sneaks up on you. It walks up slowly in small changes and patterns you notice before you admit what they mean. Daniel started coming home late. Then later. Then he'd wrap up calls right before he walked in the door, and there'd be this softness in his voice finishing those calls that I had never once heard aimed at me. The way a man talks is information. I read information for a living. And his information was telling me something I didn't want to be right about. Then the money moved. A chunk of cash left our joint account one Tuesday, big enough to be strange, not big enough to be obvious, sent somewhere I had never heard of. I brought it up over dinner that same night, straight and simple. He said it was a business thing. He stared at his plate while he said it. I've learned to trust my gut more than I trust plates. So I did what I do. I protected myself quietly. I opened a personal savings account under my own name and moved a real cushion into it over the next few weeks. I made copies of everything that mattered: the mortgage documents, our investment accounts, the insurance records on every asset I'd helped build. I packed my hospital bag for when the babies came, and I packed a second bag that I kept by the door and never told Daniel about. Late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I pulled up Caldwell Heritage Insurance's public annual reports and read through them slowly, the way you read a message from someone who's been cold to you lately, hunting for what they're leaving out. None of that felt like being paranoid. Felt like doing my job on my own life. The only thing I couldn't close was the joint account. It needed both our signatures. And the day I would have sat Daniel down and made that happen was the exact day my water broke, 6 weeks ahead of schedule. Timing doesn't care about your plans. The twins came on a Thursday night. Both girls. 8 minutes between them. They were early and furious and perfect and mine. I named them before anyone else in that family could suggest anything. Ren and Nola. Small names. Real names. Nothing that sounded like a Caldwell family tree. Daniel was stuck in Chicago traffic when they were born. He showed up 2 hours after the fact, smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. He held the girls the way you hold something you're not sure you're allowed to touch. The only person who actually showed up and stayed was my old mentor, Beverly Okafor. Beverly had spent 2 decades inside the Wisconsin Insurance Regulatory Office before she retired, and she had taught me more about how this business actually works than anyone else I've ever known. She drove 3 hours that Thursday night and did not leave until I asked her to. When the hospital paperwork came for the birth certificates, I gave my daughters my last name, Torres, not Caldwell. It was instinct. Like reaching for a seatbelt before you know there's going to be a crash. Daniel didn't even notice. For 2 days it was just me and 2 tiny people, one in each arm. I learned them. The way Ren made noise and Nola studied the world. The way they both went quiet when I hummed even badly. I told myself the hard part was done. That whatever was falling apart in my marriage could wait for sleep and a lawyer and time. I was wrong. But I didn't know how wrong yet. And that is where I need to pause right now, because if you think you know where this story is going, I promise you don't. Subscribe and stay with me. On the 3rd day, I smelled trouble before I saw it. Margaret's perfume came under the door before she did. Then she walked in, her first, then Daniel, then a young woman I had never seen, then a man in a charcoal suit carrying a folder the way lawyers carry folders when they want you to feel small. The woman I didn't know placed a designer diaper bag on my chair with this casual ownership that made my stomach drop. Daniel found something very interesting to look at on the floor. The man in the suit introduced himself as Warren Pruitt, family attorney, and he set his folder on my food tray and opened it to a tabbed section like he was presenting a business deal. Divorce papers. A settlement offer. And below those, a set of papers with blank signature lines asking me to hand my daughters over to their grandmother. Margaret sat on the edge of my hospital bed like she'd been invited. She uncapped this heavy gold fountain pen, slowly, deliberately, and the sound of it hit me somewhere deep. "This is Jade," she said, nodding toward the woman with the diaper bag. Said it like she was introducing a new appliance she'd already installed. Jade gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. Like she felt a tiny bit bad about it, but not bad enough to leave. "Sweetheart," Margaret said, and her voice was almost gentle, which was somehow the worst part. "You were never really family. You were a temporary arrangement. The girls are Caldwells. That is not personal, that is simply how dynasties work." She slid the check across my blanket. $25 million. Sign tonight, walk away rich, and this is all behind you. Push back, and my legal team will spend the next 10 years making sure a family court judge hears every reason why a cold, number-obsessed woman is not the right environment for Caldwell heirs. She let that hang in the air. Jade nodded slightly. Daniel kept staring at the floor. And in that silence, I did what I have always done when the pressure is the highest. I ran the math. 3 numbers. Number 1, those surrender papers weren't a court order. To legally take away a mother's parental rights, a judge has to be present. An oath has to be taken. Court has to put it on record that the parent fully understood what they were giving up. Warren Pruitt's folder had none of that. It had a fancy pen and a threat. Number 2, you cannot buy children. Custody is not a property deed. Every family court in this country uses one standard and one standard only: what is best for the kids. Personal check is not evidence. A judge has the final word here, not Margaret Caldwell. Number 3, and the simplest of all, I was their mother. There was no order, no ruling, no document on the planet stopping me from walking out of a hospital with my own daughters. So here's what the math told me. If I refused to sign, they'd drag me into a court battle that could last 3 years and cost everything I had. They had 100 years of money. I had a salary and a savings account. They'd grind me down before a judge ever ruled. But if I signed those papers, I'd walk out of that hospital with $25 million, 2 daughters, and a document they believed was a lock that I already knew was worth nothing at all. So I picked up the pen. I signed my married name, Cassandra Caldwell, slowly enough that every person in that room could see me doing it and feel like they'd won. Then I put the pen down. Reached for my girls. We're done here, I said. And we were. Just not the way any of them understood. I did not make a scene. I did not cry or yell or make any of them feel the weight of what had just happened. Scenes are for people who don't have a next move. I waited until visiting hours were over and the floor went quiet. The hospital had already cleared me to go home. My body was exhausted in every possible way 3 days after delivering twins, but my arms worked and my daughters weighed 7 pounds between the 2 of them. I called Beverly at 9:30. She was in the hospital parking garage 20 minutes later. I had asked her that morning to stay nearby, one more piece of preparation I was glad I'd made. I couldn't drive. You cannot safely drive 3 days after what my body had just been through, and I was not about to be reckless with 2 newborns. Beverly drove. I buckled 2 car seats into her SUV and we pulled out of that parking lot in Kenosha, Wisconsin, headed toward an apartment I had leased 6 weeks earlier under my own name in cash in a town called Elmhurst. No one knew it existed. My second bag was already there. On that drive, while Nola slept and Ren blinked slowly at passing headlights, I built a letter in my head. A formal written notice, certified mail first thing in the morning, canceling those surrender papers I had signed. Those papers weren't valid. Signing them didn't mean I was gone. It meant I had bought myself 24 hours and $25 million. If you've ever been the quiet one, the one who got passed over, the one they talked over in meetings and handed the boring jobs and stopped including in the real decisions, you already know what I'm about to say. Being quiet is not the same as being empty. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones building the most. I wasn't running from the Caldwells that night. I was moving to higher ground before the flood. If you're still here, hit that like button. 'Cause we are just getting to the part where everything changes. By the next morning, all the fear was on their side. Warren Pruitt showed up at his office early to officially file those surrender papers, and discovered there was nowhere to file them. They weren't a court order. No judge had ever touched them. Without a judge, those papers were just paper. A family court could throw them out in 60 seconds. And a woman who signed something like that in a hospital room, days after giving birth, with her husband's girlfriend standing in the corner? That's not consent. That's pressure. Any good family lawyer would call it exactly that. Worse for them, by 9 that morning my certified cancellation letter was already in the mail. Tracked. Time-stamped. with proof of delivery requested. There was not a single legal document anywhere stopping me from having my own children. Not one. I hadn't stolen anyone's kids. I had simply kept my own. Margaret called at 10. I picked up because I wanted to hear it. Her voice was different. That total certainty she always wore like jewelry, it was cracked. "Cassandra," she said. "Let's talk like adults." 4 years. That was the first time she had ever asked me anything instead of announcing it. "I am being an adult," I told her. "I'm keeping the girls and I'm keeping your money. That's the most adult decision I've made in years." She started to go back to threatening. I hung up. I sat on the floor of a 2-bedroom apartment I had rented for exactly this moment, 2 babies on a blanket in front of me, and I let myself feel it for about 30 seconds. Then I made a list. $25 million had bought them 0 grandchildren, 0 silence, and 0 control over me. What it had bought me was time. And time was all I needed. First thing I did was find a lawyer. Her name was Diane Flores, a family attorney who built her whole reputation on not backing down from money. I laid out the full picture across her conference table. Beverly watched the girls in the lobby. Diane read through those surrender papers once, then again, then set them down like they'd offended her. "These were never going to hold up," she said. "Signed under pressure. No judge involved. Husband's affair partner in the room. I could have this thrown out before noon." First easy breath I'd taken in days. Then she leaned back. "But here's what you need to know. Caldwells have deep roots and 100 years of legal fees to draw from. If they want to turn custody into a war, they can drag it 3-4 years. They'll paint you as emotionally checked out, career-obsessed, cold. You'd probably win. But probably is a word that no mom should have to hear when her kids are involved." She wasn't trying to scare me. She was treating me like a grown woman who needed the real picture. "So I win eventually, but I bleed the whole way?" I asked. "Or," she said, "you find a way to make them want this done before they even get started." I drove back to Elmhurst with that thought turning over and over. Here's what I landed on. A custody fight wasn't the real threat. The real threat was the money behind it. Caldwell money was what made them feel untouchable. It was what let them walk into my hospital room and treat my daughters like a transaction. Take the money away, take the source of it, and Margaret was just a scared woman with a pen that didn't work. So I stopped asking how to protect my daughters from the Caldwells. I started asking what was actually keeping the Caldwells standing. That question, that one shift in how I was thinking, is what changed everything. And I need you to stay with me right here because this is where it gets wild. Here's where my job became the most important thing I owned. Caldwell Heritage Insurance sold long-term care coverage, the kind of policy where regular people pay in every single month for 20 or 30 years, and in return the company promises to cover nursing care when they're old and can't take care of themselves anymore. It's one of the most important promises an insurance company can make. And to make it legally, every insurer has to hold a reserve, a pool of money set aside right now to cover the claims that are coming later. Testing whether those reserves are actually big enough is exactly what I do. I've done it for other companies. I know what solid looks like from the inside. I also know what hollow looks like when someone has dressed it up to pass inspection. I had been quietly uncomfortable with Caldwell Heritage's public numbers since before Daniel and I even got married. Their official annual reports were always a little too perfect. Their profit margins too steady. The rate at which their policyholders canceled, a key number called lapse rate, was reporting figures that no real group of older Americans actually produces. Companies that look that good in this business are almost always running a story. Because this business is hard, and the honest players don't look effortless. I pulled out the copies of their official reports I had saved before leaving the house, public documents I had every right to have, and I started reading them the way my dad taught me to read anything important. Slow. Skeptical. From the bottom up. And I found something in the papers I had copied from Daniel's home office that made my hands go cold. It was an internal stress test, the kind of private analysis a company runs to see whether its reserves could survive a bad stretch and still pay its promises. 2 columns. Left column, the reserve amount filed with the state regulators. Right column, what the company's own private math said they actually needed. The space between those 2 numbers was not a rounding error. It was not a minor gap. It was a shortfall large enough to threaten every single policyholder that company had ever signed. And in the margin of that page, in Daniel's own handwriting, keep the reported number steady through the next rate review. Underneath that, 2 sets of initials. Daniel's, and someone named Roland who held the actuary license that was supposed to certify those numbers were honest. I sat with that page a long time. But here's what I knew from experience. One internal document taken out of context proves almost nothing in a fight against a family with an army of lawyers. It's a clue, not a weapon. The only thing that could turn it into a weapon was if I could prove the same gap existed using nothing but public information. No private pages. No documents from the Home Office. Just the official reports and the standard math any qualified person could check. So that's what I set out to do. But before I tell you what I found, I need to take a breath because this is the part of the story where it stopped being about my divorce. If you're still here, and I hope you are, hit subscribe. 'Cause the next part is where it gets bigger than me. I brought everything to Beverly. We sat at her kitchen table, my girls in a playpen in the next room, my work spread out between us, and I watched a woman who had spent 20 years inside a regulatory office read through what I had built. She took her time. When she finally looked up, what she said was, "This is clean work. But the next step has to be done exactly right, or they'll use the process to bury you before the truth can surface." Then she taught me how the system actually works. When a licensed professional has documented solid evidence that an insurance company's finances don't match what they're telling the public, they can file a formal complaint with the state insurance office. If the complaint holds up, the state can send in its own examiners, people with the legal authority to walk into that company and demand every internal document they have. Not just the ones the company chose to share. All of them. If the examiners find what they find, the state can take the company to court. State oversight first. Then a full state takeover if the problems run deep enough. And if the money truly isn't there, the state winds it down in a way that protects the policyholders as much as possible because there are safety nets built for exactly this. Beverly walked me through every step. She didn't touch my analysis. She didn't need to. What she handed me was better than money. She handed me the map to the building, with the weakest wall already circled. "If your numbers are right," she said, and by the look on her face she already believed they were, "you don't have to do anything to them. You just have to put the truth in front of the right people. The truth does the rest." What came next was the part that never shows up in any revenge fantasy. The unglamorous, slow, invisible, essential part. I used some of the money Margaret had paid me, and I want to be clear, I love doing this, to buy myself time and the right tools. I licensed the industry data I needed. I rented a desk at a quiet shared workspace in Elmhurst so I could work without baby formula on my spreadsheets. Every night after Ren and Nola went down, I sat at that desk and rebuilt Caldwell Heritage's true financial position from the outside in, using nothing but information anyone could legally pull. I did not cut a single corner. Every assumption I made, I tested under the hardest possible conditions and documented every single step. 'Cause I knew that when this landed, someone on the other side would come at my work with everything they had. I needed it to be the kind of work that doesn't move when you push it. There was a week around month 2 where everything felt impossible. The analysis kept showing me numbers I wished weren't there. Not because I wanted to be wrong, but because the size of the gap meant that real people, thousands of them, had been paying into a promise that might not be there when they needed it most. A retired nurse in Racine counting on that coverage. A widower in Madison who had paid faithfully for 28 years. Margaret had gambled all of them to keep a story going. And she had tried to buy my silence with the same money she owed them. That was the week I stopped thinking of this as my revenge story. Became something else. Something I owed to people I would never meet. Then something unexpected happened. A colleague I had known for years, a risk analyst named Marcus Webb who worked at a firm that sometimes did business with Caldwell Heritage, reached out. He had heard through the industry grapevine that I was asking questions. He told me, carefully off the record, that he had noticed irregularities in their numbers years ago and had been told by his own management to leave it alone. He wasn't willing to go on record. But he told me I was looking in exactly the right places. That was the moment I knew I wasn't wrong. When I finished, I had a full financial analysis that any state examiner could follow step by step. Said in plain and careful language that Caldwell Heritage Insurance was carrying a gap between what they had and what they owed that ran into the hundreds of millions. And that the financial strength they had been reporting to the public for years was not real. I built it clean enough that even Roland, the licensed actuary whose initials were on that buried internal page, could not stand up and dismiss my work as guesswork. 'Cause it was not guesswork. It was math. Daniel came to find me before I filed anything. He showed up at my rented desk one evening, looking like a man who had spent 2 months understanding exactly what he had done. He tried 3 different approaches in about 20 minutes. First, he came as my husband. He missed me, he said. He missed the girls. He had made serious mistakes and he was sorry. I let that one sit in the air between us until it stopped moving. Then he came as a negotiator. There was more money available if I would sign something final and let everything go. I almost felt sorry for him that he thought that would work. Then he dropped both of those and came as the man Margaret had raised. His voice went low and flat. You need to stop what you're doing, Cassandra. Whatever it is. Just stop. For your own sake. He hadn't said one word about Ren and Nola. Not one word. A father fighting for his daughters leads with his daughters. Daniel led with stop what you're doing. He wasn't scared of losing custody. He was scared of what I was about to find, because his own initials were on a page he was praying I had never really understood. I'm done digging, I told him. I'm wrapping up. His face did something I had never seen it do before. Real fear, the kind that doesn't have a PR strategy. He left. I went back to work. Margaret came a few days later. She came differently than I expected, alone to a coffee shop in Oak Park without Todd or Pruitt or anyone. Just a woman who looked, for a moment, like what she actually was, a widow trying to hold something together that had been crumbling for years. She told me about Richard. How he had started the company with a folding card table and a phone he could barely afford. How he had died with his name on the building and his full trust in her to protect it. And then, quietly, she told me the truth she had been sitting on for almost 2 decades. The reserves had started going thin during a bad stretch in the industry years ago. She had decided to keep the reported numbers steady and buy time until things turned around. They never turned around. So she kept holding the line because admitting the truth would not just destroy the company, it would drag Richard's name through the mud permanently. She could not survive letting him die twice. For a minute, a real minute, I felt it. She was scared. She was old. She had repeated a lie so many times it had become the person she was protecting. Then she set down her coffee and reminded me who she actually was. Those girls carry the Caldwell name, she said, and the softness was gone just like that. They belong with that name. You were always a practical arrangement. Practical arrangements don't make family decisions. And there it was. She would let thousands of people's retirement coverage evaporate rather than tell the truth. She had tried to buy my daughters with stolen money. And she had the nerve to call that protecting a legacy. Whatever had almost softened in me went completely quiet. She had almost gotten me for 60 seconds. Then she reminded me what she thought my children were. So I went home, sat down at my desk, and finished the report. After everything, the hospital room, the drive out of Kenosha, the months of work, the visits, the most powerful thing I ever did made no sound at all. I packaged everything into a formal complaint and submitted it to the Wisconsin office of the Commissioner of Insurance. Every number, every source, every step anyone could check. My name on it, plain and clear, because anonymous complaints get filed in the back of a drawer. Beverly looked at the cover letter and changed 2 words. Then she said, "Send it." I didn't send it hot. I sent it the way you submit anything you have checked 100 times, with a steadiness that surprised even me. I drove to the post office myself and also submitted electronically through the official department channel. Kept every confirmation, every timestamp, every tracking number. No drama. No press call. No viral moment. Just a file number and an email confirmation and silence. I sat in my car in that parking lot afterward and something happened that hadn't happened in months. My hands stopped shaking. It was the quietest thing I had ever done. But it was already the beginning of the loudest thing that had ever happened to that family. Because state insurance offices exist for one reason: to act when the math doesn't match the promise. I had just handed them a case they could not ignore. The machine was turning. And it would turn without me now. I had leaned on the wall. What happened next was just gravity. The Wisconsin insurance office moved faster than Beverly had predicted. Within weeks, word spread through the regional insurance community the way it always spreads in a tight industry. The state had opened a full financial review of Caldwell Heritage Insurance. Examiners were inside the building demanding internal documents. The documents that had to match the public reports. That, of course, didn't. You cannot keep a private version of the truth once the government asks to see both copies. The rumors hit fast, because financial instability rumors in a small market travel like fire in dry grass. The manufactured strength Caldwell Heritage had been projecting began to crack in public. Daniel stopped showing up at the office. Margaret tried to frame the review as routine, a non-event, nothing worth worrying about, but when you tell people there's nothing to worry about, the first thing they do is worry. Jade, who had walked into my hospital room with a diaper bag and a pitying smile, had been watching Daniel go pale and quiet for 2 weeks. She hadn't fallen for Daniel the person. She had fallen for what Daniel represented: the name, the house, the lifestyle. The moment those things stopped looking stable, Jade did what someone with her priorities does. She was gone within a month. No goodbye, no drama. Just gone, off to attach herself to someone whose balance sheet wasn't being reviewed by the government. Left Daniel with a divorce in process, a serious legal problem building, and a last name that was becoming a liability instead of an asset. I'll be honest, I didn't gloat. But when Beverly told me, I let myself smile for about as long as it takes to heat up a baby bottle. Then I moved on. Drowning, Margaret did what she always did. She tried to control the room. She summoned me, not through lawyers, not through a settlement offer, to the company's annual policyholder meeting at Caldwell Heritage's headquarters in downtown Milwaukee. The message came through Daniel, who sounded like a man who had not slept in 2 weeks. "Come and be reasonable. We can fix this before it goes further." She still thought there was a number that would move me or a threat that would silence me. She did not understand that there was nothing left she could take or offer. My girls were safe. My money was clean. Case was already in the government's hands, running on its own momentum. I was being invited to negotiate something that had already been settled. I said yes. Not because she had any power over me. 'Cause I wanted to be in the room when it happened. I wore something plain, I always do, I've never needed a costume, arranged for Beverly to stay with the girls and drove downtown. The meeting was held in the main auditorium at Caldwell Heritage headquarters. Kind of room companies build to make people feel like their money is safe. Rows of chairs, a raised platform at the front, navy and gold banners with the company's 100-year seal. And the people in those chairs, most of them older, gray-haired couples who had been paying into this company for decades. A few moved with canes. One woman near the front was holding a folder of her own statements against her chest with both hands. Those were the people this had actually been about the whole time. There was press in the back. Local reporters, a financial journalist. Board members sat along one side, looking like people who had gotten a phone call that morning they wished they hadn't. And Margaret at the front, pearl necklace, pressed suit, that same heavy perfume hanging around her like it always had. Her gold fountain pen beside her notes on the podium. She saw me come in. She gave me a small, confident smile from across the room. The smile of a woman who still believed she was the one setting the terms. I sat down in the back row and felt nothing but calm. She opened the meeting the way she had opened 100 of them, warm and unhurried, the voice of someone who has never had a room resist her. She thanked everyone for their loyalty. She called the recent questions about the company noise from outsiders who didn't understand what had been built here. She promised a strong year ahead. She used the word strong so many times it started to sound hollow even to people who hadn't been looking at her books. Then the side door opened. 2 people walked in. One was a woman in a navy suit with a government badge on a lanyard and a leather case under her arm. The other was carrying a box of documents. The state examiner. Margaret stopped mid-sentence. The examiner didn't raise her voice. She introduced herself and stated, in the plain flat language of someone doing a job, that following the completion of the state's review, the commissioner had gone to court and Caldwell Heritage Insurance was being placed under state oversight effective immediately. New policies suspended. Further review underway. She said it the way you say something that was already true before you walked in. The room shifted. The woman with her policy folder held it tighter. The board members went stiff. The reporter in the back started writing fast. And Margaret stood at her own podium with the rest of her speech still in her mouth, watching the actual verdict arrive in a box carried by a stranger. Then she broke. She grabbed the podium. Her voice went sharp and loud and desperate, calling it a setup, a smear, a campaign by jealous people who wanted to tear down what the Caldwells had built. That composed exterior cracked in front of every person she had ever asked to trust her. Her eyes found me in the back of the room. She pointed. "This is her," she said. "My son's wife. She did this. This is spite. This is..." She grabbed her gold fountain pen off the podium like she was going to sign something or fight something with it. But her hand was shaking too badly. Pen just dragged a smear of ink across the page and refused to form a single word. The same pen that had clicked so calmly over my hospital blanket 3 days after I had my daughters. Couldn't write a thing. I stood up. I walked to the front of that room slowly, the way you move when you've already settled something and all that's left is saying it out loud. The room watched. I stopped near the podium and I kept my voice low and even. "You told me I wasn't really family," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "That I was just a practical arrangement on a spreadsheet. You were right. So I did what I do, I read the whole spreadsheet. And the number that doesn't add up? That's yours." Someone in the rows made a sound. I kept going, same tone. $25 million to make me disappear. You said it was the cheapest deal you'd ever make. Turned out it was the most expensive, because all it did was give a risk analyst 25 million reasons and all the time she needed to do her job. Then I turned my back on Margaret Caldwell, because the people I had actually done this for weren't her. The woman in the front row, the one with the folder, stood up slowly. She looked at me. She asked the question that had been the real point of everything for months. Is our money still going to be there? When we need it? The whole room went absolutely still. Margaret had no answer. She had spent 20 years making sure she would never have to give one in public. I answered it. Trade in plain, the way my dad taught me to talk about hard things. I told her the company had not kept enough money in reserve to honor every policy the way it should have. That was true, and she deserved to know it. But the state oversight that had just arrived was not the disaster, it was the safety net. The state comes in precisely to protect policyholders, not just shut things down. There are industry-level safety systems that exist for exactly this moment so that people who paid in good faith for 30 years don't just lose everything. The examiner standing next to me gave one small nod. My numbers and the state's numbers had been saying the same thing all along. And that was the moment it was really, truly over. Once the wall goes, everything behind it goes fast. Caldwell Heritage moved from state oversight into full state management within months. The financial health they had been reporting for years evaporated overnight. The family trust, which had been drawing from that company for decades, faced government recovery efforts as the process of unwinding began. Caldwell Manor, which had been used as backing for company finances, changed hands. Richard Caldwell's name ended up in every regional news story about the fraud. The thing Margaret had been lying for 20 years to prevent? She caused it herself. Daniel faced serious professional and legal consequences. A licensed actuary putting their name on a knowingly false financial report is not the kind of thing regulators or law enforcement let pass. Warren Pruitt's certainty about his airtight legal strategy had been misplaced. Jade was long gone. They had been so sure that money insulated them from consequences that they had never once considered the specific risk that would bring them down. The quiet woman who happened to know exactly how to read the numbers they were hiding behind. They built that outcome themselves. I just refused to look away. Custody issue wrapped up almost quietly, which is exactly how it should have gone. When it reached an actual courtroom with an actual judge, the standard was simple. What is best for Ren and Nola? Those surrender papers I had signed in the hospital had never been valid to begin with. Their dad was the subject of a serious investigation and had never once shown up fighting for them. Their mom was stable, present, and working to protect not just her own kids but thousands of strangers. The judge spoke the last word. The girls stayed with me. I still have the $25 million. The divorce and custody were treated as separate matters by the court, which is how it's supposed to work. Pressure that made those surrender papers invalid didn't touch the financial agreement I had made with clear eyes and full information. The strangest part came at the very end. Court-appointed team cleaning up Caldwell Heritage's finances needed people who understood that company from the inside. There was an obvious problem with hiring the person who had filed the original complaint, and they raised it themselves before I could. So they structured it carefully. I was kept away from anything touching my own legal matters, brought in as an outside reviewer with my work checked independently by someone the court trusted. I took the job. I used some of the money to make sure the claims kept getting paid while the cleanup was underway. So the woman in the front row of that meeting still gets her care covered. So the people who paid faithfully for 30 years weren't just left holding worthless paper. I sign those checks now. Honestly. At the company that used to be Richard Caldwell's, while Margaret watches from outside. We are the Torres girls. All three of us, Ren, Nola, and me. They were so sure the dangerous person in that hospital room was the one with the money and the lawyer and the fountain pen. They never once stopped to think about the woman in the bed, the one who already knew that numbers and children are two things you cannot simply purchase. That's the end. A gold pen that couldn't write. A company that couldn't hold. Two little girls who went to sleep in a house that had always been theirs. If you made it all the way here, if this story hit something real in you, if you've ever been the person that powerful people looked past or wrote off or handed a document and told to sign, drop a comment. Tell me your city. Tell me which part got to you. I read every single one. And if you know somebody right now who is in a fight they feel like they can't win, who is tired of being underestimated, who is being asked to stay quiet and walk away, share this story with them. Because the people who do the quiet work, the patient work, the unglamorous work, those are always the ones nobody sees coming. This is silent revenge. Be calm. Be accurate. And subscribe, because this channel is for the ones who take their time and get it right.